Welcome back, creeps.
Hey y'all.
We are recording another episode. We went to see 28 Years Later last night.
In 4DX.
It was intense, honestly. I don't know if it added to the movie or took away from the movie, but I was like literally like sliding out of my seat and shit.
I don't know. I feel like I understand why it's a good. I don't like the water. The water thing was a strange choice. Whenever the arrow went through a zombie,
Yeah.
and like there's blood splatters on the screen, you get splashed with water either from the roof, from the seat in front of you, or from somewhere. And I just don't know if there's mold in those receptacles that are holding the water, how clean that water is.
That's a good point, actually. I never even thought about that, to be honest.
Because we live in Houston. Houston's natural. And then in addition to, like, it's fucking water in there.
Yeah, but there was moments when like just these random fans would start blowing.
Yeah, that I enjoyed.
But
Because, like,
it actually felt like you were just outside.
yeah, because
in a field or something.
exactly, like those field scenes where you're like on a cliff and the wind is blowing.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is actually the nicest part.
Whatever about the zombies, it feels lovely here.
Yeah, and then like when the stabbing happened, you get like little pokes in the back of
Yeah.
the seat. That kind of creeped the shit out of me. I'm not gonna
No,
lie.
it was fun. Like, I'll definitely do it again. But I might go back and watch the movie without it separately. Although I don't think I missed much.
I think that would be more enjoyable if it wasn't a scary movie.
If it was like Shrek or something.
Yeah, like something fun, because it
was
did take
pretty
you away
intense.
from. Yeah, it was like intense in a uncomfortable way.
Yeah. But definitely, it was a good film.
And what were you saying? Like the seats were rocking. Like I was saying like the seats were rocking. Like do you guys remember that scene in Ace Ventura 2, where it was
Yeah.
just like,
When he's
this.
pretending like, yeah, he's on safari.
yeah, it was very much that.
Yeah. But like, I did just watch 28 Days and 28 Weeks Later. And then this one, like I had heard an interview with Danny Boyle talking with a YouTuber that I actually used to like. And they were talking about, oh, like some of it's filmed on the iPhone and this and that. And I was like,
Is that the director, Danny Boyle?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, oh, that's really cool. Like, interesting choice. But for a lot of the movie, like, it looked like the 2004, like, which was recorded in like 480 pixels or something. And I'm not that much of a nerd, but like, there was a lot of it that was just like, it felt like I was still watching 28 Days Later.
Yeah,
You know?
I can see that. I think the filter, I feel like they were using a filter on the movie as well,
Yeah.
to make, it's like a color filter.
Yeah. And then like, obviously the special effects on the zombies was fantastic. But then there was other stuff that was in the film that, like, for me, I was just like, what am I doing here? This looks like something from like 1992.
I was only able to rewatch 28 Weeks Later. I think I have like an hour left. And that movie is so messed up.
Yeah.
Like that part where he's like, where they get caught by those military men and they're like, we can give you a choice, you can leave or not, but we can't let the women go.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to
Repopulate.
rebuild. That's disgusting.
Definitely. And did you recognize that guy?
The military guy?
Yeah.
No.
I watched Cracker recently. Recently, probably last year,
Is
actually.
that a UK thing?
Yeah, remember the one with Hagrid where he was like
Oh, yeah.
a detective, but he had like major gambling and drinking. He was basically living like a rock star life, but he had like a family at home, and that was the whole thing.
Oh,
It
yeah,
was like,
and he had,
oh,
like, the other
he's a
woman.
genius, but
But
You
he's
know.
very flawed human.
yeah. Anyway,
Just like you
so yeah, 28 years later.
in your head.
Oh, and friendship. Did we talk about friendship in the last one? I can't remember. I think we probably did. Anyway, that's another good film that we saw recently.
Oh, yeah. We did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's it, right?
I saw Ballerina before Adam met me at the movies. It was a fun movie. I enjoyed it. It was very like the same vibe as the other John Wick movies. It was nice to see Keanu Reeves in this one. Like, I just love, like, I was like sitting there thinking, why do I love Keanu Reeves as John Wick so much? He is, you know how like people say like Ryan Reynolds is Deadpool? He is John Wick. Like I feel like John Wick, or maybe it is. I don't know much about like the lore of the movies or the creation, but I feel like the character John Wick was written specifically for
Oh,
Keanu Reeves because his character is very like his conversation is so not limited but very direct, no fluff words, no and that kind of deal. Like
he's autistic.
it's like his sentences will never be more than 6 words. You know what I'm saying? And it, I don't know, like it,
You're not selling it. Not
but
gonna
like,
lie.
but like it coincides with like someone who's had like probably had like a lot of the people that are part of the Ruska Roma had like a crazy ass traumatic life. And he's just in there to do his job because they're all like hitmans. He's a hitman, you know, basically. And so he's just like, he's able to compartmentalize. You can tell his skill for compartmentalization. He is detached, but he's still analytical and he can still empathize at the same time. I don't know, like it was mechanical is probably the best word for it. And I think I appreciate that about his character.
Interesting. I don't know anything about those films, so I have no input.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you liked it.
Love action movies.
All right, you got a card for us?
Yes. So today's card is the Seven of Pentacles reversed. Today's message is pay attention to the feedback you're getting. Whether it's a work project, a health plan, or a financial investment, look objectively at what's working well and what could use adjustment. Don't let perceived failure get you down. Instead, learn from your errors, make the necessary changes, and carry on.
Wow.
Bitch.
All right. So, in this episode, we will learn the story of the ghost of Diddington Manor. You're not allowed to look at my notes.
I just wanted to see how Diddington was spelled.
Diddington.
Diddy.
As you would expect. Diddington. Diddington Manor, nestled in the English countryside, which today is surrounded by lovely green golf courses and a little tree-lined lanes not far from Birmingham Airport. Our story takes place long before the airport was ever thought of, though, a time when the only example of air travel was when someone might have stumbled off a cliff or been thrown from a catapult. We're talking 1600s Cromwellian England.
Okay.
Back when men were men, not the puny-jawed sandwich-eating softies we're surrounded by today.
Sandwiches. Again with the sandwiches.
Yeah. Sandwiches are the downfall of the real man. That's what I learned last week. Anyway, the legend of Diddington goes that Philip Aylesford, son of the ever-noble John Aylesford, who had famously convinced King Charles to sign the Petition of Right, was married to a beautiful but cold and frigid wife, Dorothea. Dorothea was the daughter of a neighbouring nobleman. The match had been made to consolidate the two estates and therefore to keep the money coming. Right, I can't remember which estate was supposed to be failing, but they were like, well, if we just marry the kids, then we'll all be fine. Very Downton Abbey. Neither Philip nor Dorothea were happy with this arrangement. One day, when out riding on the boundaries of his estates, Philip came across an encampment of travelling people and saw there a beautiful, dark-eyed, raven-haired girl named Margot. Very exotic. He fell instantly in love with her, and presumably the feeling was mutual because Philip brought her back to secretly live in the gatehouse near the stables of Diddington Manor, his family home. I don't know how fast this move would have happened, but people seem to have acted a lot faster back in those days. Like, quick, you must come now. I can see another plague cresting the hill doth yonder. And the only cure is in my pantaloons, baby. For some time, their little love nest remained a dirty secret. But eventually Dorothea copped on. She found Margot and accused her of witchcraft and of stealing her husband. Philip, the smarmy little snake, was too scared of losing his reputation and his possessions to protest at the trial, and so Margot was convicted of witchcraft and burned at the stake. Philip subsequently was stricken with remorse, having not tried to defend Margot and used to pace the battlements of Diddington in despair. Finally, one morning his body was found at the foot of the battlements, where he had cast himself in a fit of agony and remorse.
Cast himself what? How, like...
Off of the fucking battlements. He's on the ground now. He threw himself off.
He threw himself off a cliff?
Philip subsequently was stricken with remorse, having not tried to defend Margot and used to pace the battlements of Diddington in despair. Finally, one morning, his body was found at the foot of the battlements where he had cast himself in a fit of agony and remorse. He cast himself from the battlements of Diddington Manor onto the ground below.
So he fell.
He jumped.
Oh, okay. I thought he just like threw himself on the floor and was having a fit. Like, I'm so sad.
Oh,
That's
he jumped off the fucking top of the thing. Like,
oh. I was like, so he was just sitting there having a crybaby fucking bitch fit.
no, he jumped.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood.
Jesus.
Like, I'm such a bad person. Wah. Oh no. A person is dead because of me.
Every 100 years or so, this is very serious.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Every 100 years or so, since his death, Philip's ghost has been seen pacing the battlements of Diddington, where he threw himself in a fit of agony and remorse onto the ground below to finish himself, just as he had done so many times in life. So, what a lovely little example of a ghost story, right?
Yeah.
A folk tale not dissimilar to so many that we have discussed here before. And one that sounds almost so familiar that you're all probably trying to think, have I heard this one before? Or is it another legend that you're thinking of? Well, this one is a big steaming pile of made up shit. A whole bag of baloney. Bollocks, as it were. John Aylesford never existed. Nor did Dorothea, or even the radiant, whimsical, dark-eyed Margot. Diddington Hall apparently is real, but I can't find it anywhere. And Philip never threw himself from the battlements, but he did exist. Kind of. He actually provided some of the details of his story from that time. Let's get into it. In the autumn, this is a very confusing subject, so
he just
buckle
made up
in.
a story about himself.
Kind of, we're going to get into it.
Okay.
In the autumn of 1972, a group of paranormal enthusiasts, members of the Toronto Society for Psychical Research, or the TSPR for short, decided to have themselves a little experiment. I think it was actually TSPR is what they called themselves, but we're going with TSPR. Originally, the group would be comprised of around 12 to 14 individuals. A smaller number was optimal, but they had to allow some wiggle room for people to drop out.
To cast himself on the floor in agony and despair.
One of the main rules when signing up for this was that if you felt like you didn't get along too well with any other group member, you had to leave because it was imperative to the experiment that the group had a good rapport. Right? So talk about a practice in self-awareness, right? I think that's the scariest part of this whole experiment for probably a lot of people, you know?
Yeah.
Like, does John like me? You know?
Yeah.
What about Sue? Like, anyway, the final iteration of the group that went on to perform the experiment consisted of the following. Al, a heating engineer, practical, sensible. Lorne, an industrial designer, very artistic and creative, a history buff, astronomer. Andy, Lorne's wife, artistic, well-read, astronomer, lover of cats. Bernice, accountant, artsy, outdoorsy, well-read, philosophical. Dorothy, housewife, Cub Scout leader, well-versed in parapsychology, also a trained accountant. Sydney, the youngest member of the group, studying sociology in college, recently bearded. Sue,
What the fuck does that mean?
he recently grew a beard,
Oh, okay.
as of the autumn of 1972.
Okay.
Sue, the chairman of Mensa for Canada, nurse and mother of three. Mother of three, sorry. Yeah, all right.
Remember when Sophia said that I was saying the word 3 wrong?
Yeah, it's tree. And then finally, Iris, the oldest member of the group, author, nurse, secretary for TSPR. She actually has too many accolades to list here, but basically like this superwoman social worker who did so much volunteer work and worked on many a paranormal case in Canada and also in England before her and her husband moved to Canada. Big cases like the Saki poltergeist and stuff like that, which, we will cover eventually. I have the book. I've read most of it. Anyway, so yeah, she worked on that apparently. So obviously there's a lot of brain power here in this small little group, but they were all very level-headed and had a very clear idea of just how this experiment should go. The inspiration for the experiment had come from the writings of K.J. Batcheldor and Colin Brooks Smith, who did work in a similar vein. Sue was the one who would write Philip's main story, which was then learned off by heart by the rest of the group, and Andy drew a picture of Philip based off of everyone's collective description. This meant that everyone would have a clear image, literally, of who they were communicating with, which essentially made the story real in their minds. They could literally fact check each other, and I think this really lent to the idea that there was no, special person in the group, no medium or psychic or anything like that who could just be going off of their own thoughts, oh, well, Philip told me this because I have a special power and I can communicate with him.
Okay.
So on the subject of mediums, the participants of the Philip experiment had to be individuals who had, as far as they were aware, never had any sort of psychic experience in their lives. Just ordinary people. One aim of the experiment was actually to prove that mediums or psychics were not needed to produce phenomena. The sessions would be held in well-lit conditions suitable for audio and visual recordings. So they were going to summon Philip, right?
Like a tulpa.
Exactly. They set up Philip's room, which would be used especially for their meetings. They had pictures of the actual Diddington Manor. Apparently one of the members of the group had actually stayed at this Diddington Manor. Maybe it was just bought and sold since the 70s, and that's why I couldn't find it. Maybe it's a fucking Ramada or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyway, so they had pictures of the actual manor that the story was based on and the surrounding countryside. They had Philip's portrait that Andy drew, some fencing swords because Philip apparently loved fencing, and various other items from or about Philip's time period, such as books and songs, etc. I think they had a record player with medieval harp music or something as well, that kind of stuff.
So did they ever embellish any of Philip's interests, or it's documented because Philip was a real person?
So that we're going to get into that.
Oh.
So having a room like this dedicated for Philip doesn't seem out of place given this whole situation, right? These are fairly... It's kind of an out there plan anyway, you know what I mean? So you're oh yeah, well, of course they have a room for the ghost, But there was another reason why they gave him his own room. And this is a quote from the book. It had been agreed that if any kind of manifestation of Philip's presence was obtained, he should be confined to one room. Till it's known in what form his manifestation might occur, it was felt safer to ensure that this only occurred when the group was together. So that sounds kind of scary, to be honest. And there is elements of this, throughout this whole experiment, that they're dealing with something scary, essentially, the whole time. But maybe not quite fear, but when telling the story of the Philip experiment, it can come across a little bit sterile, right? Or overly scientific. And obviously there's a purpose to that. They were trying to be taken seriously by other, serious scholars. But every now and then, I'd be reminded that this is, still a very spooky subject, When reading Conjuring Up Philip, I felt that there was a sense of, if a scientist, scholar, or skeptic was reading this, they were being catered to by the delivery. But at their deepest core, the Toronto Society for Psychical Research were just ghost nerds in the 1970s, same as us now. A big part of what they did was help normies who were experiencing strange goings-on in their home. They didn't necessarily have the answers, but they were very curious and always willing to help, or at least listen to people's problems without accusing them of, lunacy. That being said, did they really think that they were going to unleash some sentient entity onto the world that could potentially wreak havoc and become unstoppable? Did they?
No.
Maybe. I think at the beginning, they really weren't sure of their own potential, but they had some really interesting theories. So while reassuring the reader that they did still believe that a haunting was completely plausible and a ghost could just be a ghost, Philip, from my understanding, was more of an exploration into psychokinesis and poltergeist activity.
Okay.
So here at Weekly Creep, we've covered plenty of poltergeist cases, and there's always been a consistent question of, is this activity being caused by an individual, being caused by the very victim who has been suffering the effects of the activity, or is this some like passing ball of energy that just happened to blend with the hormones and emotions of the average family to cause all of this strangeness? Because like, how many times have we heard, oh, it's because of the boy or the girl, you know what I mean? It's all
Yeah.
their fault. Everything happens to them. Well, the Tisvipper gang believed strongly that it was caused by the human brain. That's telekinesis, Kyle.
That's telekinesis, Kyle.
All right.
Psychokinesis, actually, but that's how they refer to it in the book. And Google says psychokinesis is a broader term encompassing the ability to influence or manipulate objects, matter, energy, or even time, all through the mind. Telekinesis is a more specific term referring to the ability to move objects with the mind without physical contact. Uri Geller stuff, you know, like bending spoons,
Oh,
moving
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
The group felt that this was a skill which needed to be trained and worked on, just like playing an instrument or learning a new software. Okay, that's fine, and I hear what you're saying, but what about group sightings?
See, that was psychokinesis that you could hear what I'm saying.
Yeah, see? See? But yeah, what about group sightings? Like, we've all been to a haunted place and we saw the woman in white, right? Telepathy. Boom. End of. Let's move on. No, but like, let's say the Enfield haunting, right? Or one of the bigger poltergeist cases that took place over an extended period of time, for example, where, you know, it's been like months or years and this activity has happened sporadically. This would typically be referred to as RSP in parapsychology papers and more like formal accounts. And we've definitely spoken about RSP before, but it stands for recurring spontaneous psychokinesis. And it's fairly self-explanatory, as if like someone who maybe has a build-up of whatever this psychic energy is sneezed and there was an outburst of activity in their house, right? An example of RSP came from, I think it was Guy Playfair's book about the Enfield haunting, but it might have been Colin Wilson's book. I actually can't remember, and I wasn't going through the books to find out. But either way, the author talks about one random day when the house just started, like their own personal house, just started like knocking and paranormal activity kicked up. And they like went outside to try and like see what was going on. It sounded like someone was sawing or something. It was like really weird. And it was him and his dad was home, and his adolescent sister was upstairs in the bedroom like sulking because I think it was the summer home and she didn't want to be there. Basically, some sort of like small argument within the family had happened. And that was the one and only time this ever happened. So him being a parapsychologist and being used to this was like, well, it had to have been like some hormonal thing, right? Psychokinesis. Anyway, it was one random occurrence. Anyway, the Phillip gang believed that this energy, or whatever it was, could be used or trained and used on the regular. The interesting thing here, though, is that often when we talk about RSP, the events can be quite violent, right? Like, again, back to the Enfield haunting. Remember the first night when the police came over and the chair was like dragged across the room? Eventually, like knives were thrown, stuff like that. People being hit. Whereas anytime we talk about people practicing their psychokinetic abilities, it's usually like the smallest of things. Maybe bending a spoon with the mind. Like, that seems to be about the height of it, right? That being said, though, one person can't lift a car, or shouldn't be able to lift a car, but a group of people working together can. This is called portage of committee. So, in the book Conjuring Up Philip, they suggested, why not psychokinesis by committee? If 6 or 8 ordinary people each have rudimentary PK abilities, psychokinesis, can they, by working together, add up their separate contributions of PK force so as to manifest a physical effect? Again, this is taken from the book. It's a bit heavy. So with the root of Philip's story written and learned by all of the participants, it was time to begin. The group scheduled weekly meetings, and initially their plan of attack was group meditation, followed by a general conversation about what they had felt or what they might reflect upon, or they might reflect upon Philip's story and just speculate on what he might have been like as a person. As far as I can tell, the whole session would take place with the group members sitting around either a table, like just a folding card table, nothing special, or a piece of aluminum, a cardboard covered with aluminium foil, and then they would put Philip's portrait on that. You know what I mean? And the idea was, if he was to show himself, he would come in the center of the circle, either on the piece of cardboard or on the table. Each session would then end with more meditation, right? So I think initially the group meditation sessions might have been a little bit awkward, but as the group became more accustomed to each other and meditating in general, those portions of the meetings became longer. So they would just sit and be present with each other. It sounds lovely, to be honest. One interesting point that came from those meditations, or from the discussions rather, after the meditations, was that as time went on, some individuals would start to say things like, Philip told me, he likes the color blue or whatever. Or I saw Philip at the stables today, some random shit like that. And I think this was maybe people's egos like stepping in. And the overseer, who was Dr. Owens, who was Iris's husband, I think. There was two overseers. Anyway, one of them would step in and quickly remind the individual that this is not the point of the experiment. So even if they had a direct thought planted in their brain from Philip and they were cocksure, like, Philip told me he doesn't like this, it doesn't matter because he didn't tell the group.
Okay.
And so they would like knock down that kind of train of thought.
That's a good way to like eliminate influence
Exactly. Yeah. So
and mob mentality.
yeah. And it was felt that if an individual started to divulge, Philip would become fragmented and the morale of the group would decline. Philip had to show himself to all members at the same time, even if it was a group hallucination. Otherwise, the experience would be discounted. These initial sessions carried on for 1 full year with basically no results, right?
Wow.
These people were like,
Committed.
yeah, very committed. And like, it's 1972. What else are you going to do, I actually would like to try out this portion of the experiment. I would like to try out this whole experiment, to be honest. But imagine just meeting up with the same group of friends intentionally for a couple of hours every week, meditating, having the chats, meditating again, and then just going home.
Who has the time?
Well, yeah. But like, how nice would that be? Like, even if like you're not talking about anything in particular.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
If time wasn't an issue, then yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah. But surely like this would create a really strong bond. Maybe even some telepathic connection. Who knows? Also, I think it's worth pointing out that I don't know what the group relationship was like prior to this experiment. Everyone was a member of TISFPR beforehand, obviously, but I don't know how close they were or if they even really knew each other at all, because the Toronto Society for Psychical Research, much like the British one, I can't think of the name, I think that's just the Society for Psychical Research, it was like whoever comes to the meetings. And then like this how what's his nuts got onto the Enfield haunting, not to keep referencing that, but was it Maurice Gross, because he just happened to be at the meeting that night and it came up, oh, there's a family in Enfield that are having this issue, and he was like, yeah, sure, I'll go check it out. You know what I mean? And now he's like written into history. So this, I think, was kind of in a similar vein, A full year of no results, though, was not exactly ideal for group morale. So it was decided that they would change their approach. It was at this point that, based off the work of Batchelor and Brooks, they decided to try the Victorian seance approach. This meant sitting around in a relaxed and jolly atmosphere, singing songs and hymns, making jokes, and carrying on a conversation among themselves. So not at all what I expected, to be honest. When they say like Victorian seances, I thought like, okay, are they all going to have to wear nothing but black and like wear veils and shit like that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hold hands and candles and stuff.
Yeah, which that part is kind of in it.
Yeah.
But they agreed that they would try these sessions, but they would keep to their well-lit conditions. They had a panel of coloured lights behind a frosted glass screen, and most of the time I'm pretty sure they would use like a pinkish red colour.
Why?
Right. I think that's just what they felt comfortable with.
Oh, okay.
Which, interestingly enough, my niece, hi Sophia, if you're watching this, you shouldn't be. She goes to bed with a coloured light bulb in her room, and obviously, like now, it's just a Philips Hue or whatever. But the light that she goes for is the red one. Like that's the colour that she chooses.
That's relaxing to her.
Yeah, but when you walk into the room to check on her at night, it's fucking terrifying. Like, you know what I mean? But anyway, yeah. So maybe that is a comfortable colour. I don't know. Anyway, the new sessions would start out with the discussion period, I suppose, to get everyone like kind of settled in. And then they would start to tell jokes, sing songs, recite poetry, etc. And they did admit that the first couple of these sessions was a bit awkward because, like, no matter how close you are to someone, like, to just start, like, singing with each other around the table, stuff like that, you know, it's kind of weird. They had to genuinely believe, though, that this method would produce activity and be aware that they were trying to do so while simultaneously relaxing and concentrating on holding a light-hearted conversation or singing a song with the rest of the group. So there's a lot going on, you know what I mean, mentally.
Okay. I get it. I understand that, because it's like, if you're closed off, you're closed off. You know what I mean? If you're meditating, there's no way for you to embarrass yourself because you're just sitting there being quiet. Whereas if your defenses are essentially lowered if you're allowing yourself to be silly in front of a group. Yeah,
and I think it's kind of like, you know, driving a car. Like if you try, in a manual car, you try to drive up a hill, like from stopped. When you're learning how to drive, that's your biggest nightmare. And you're thinking about every single move. You're like, okay, I have to pull the clutch out a little bit. I have to hold the handbrake until I have to get my revs up, you know. Whereas 2-3 years later, you know, you're on the phone, you're eating a croissant, and you're doing a hill start without even thinking about
it. You don't even remember
how
you got home.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And that's just how it goes with everything. So I think, like, after a few sessions, they were like, oh, I am aware of this, but I'm not actively thinking on it. You know what I mean? Finally, about 3 or 4 weeks into the new sessions, the group felt something that seemed to come from the table. It was as if something had knocked on the table, but not quite hard enough for anyone to really hear it. Thankfully, the knocking kept up, gradually getting louder and louder until everyone could hear it. Then, the table started to move, sudden, jerky movements with no apparent reason. Sometimes the movements were so violent that the members literally could not keep up with it. Like, this wasn't just like, oh, a half an inch here, like, did you feel that? Like, the table was sliding out from underneath them. Naturally, the members of the group first thought that this was another person causing this, whether they knew it or not, and they were skeptical, but the actions of the table just could not be written off as human interference.
Right.
And again, the group is being monitored and recorded at all of these sessions, you know?
By the overseers?
By the overseers, yeah.
Are they in the room with them?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And, like, Dr. Owens, I don't know what his like doctorate is in, but the other doctor whose name is below, I can't remember, I think it's like Witten, he was an actual psychologist, like a medical psychologist, not a parapsychologist, you know, and they made sure to make that to define that in the book, you know what I mean? Anyway, amidst all the faffing about with members trying to debunk, Dorothy asked aloud, I wonder if by chance Philip is doing this. And her question was answered immediately by a swift, solid rap on the table. Philip had arrived at last, after over a year.
Oh.
Now, one of the big rules for how this would work, they believed at least, was that they could not react shocked or scared in any sense, right? They just had to be like, yes, of course, we were expecting this because we're scientists and this is the result that we were expecting. So we have to act normal.
Imagine trying to remember to do that after a whole year.
Exactly. Or just with your table now suddenly making random knocking noises. Like,
force yourself to not be shocked. Easier said than
done.
done.
Yeah. But I think like what they said like makes sense, right? Because their belief was that it's this, like the reaction is what actually stops activity in its tracks. And so it makes sense, but like, fair play to them for keeping it cool, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that really like separates the believers from the non-believers.
Yeah.
Like, if you're shocked, then did you really believe in this?
That's another layer of it, yeah. But I suppose it makes sense, like, in, say, we're out for a walk and we see the blue lady of,
Yeah,
Bel Air or
and then
whatever.
like, are you shocked or are you just startled?
Yeah, but whatever it is, I think it's like, well, now I've dedicated my attention solely to this with the shock, and now it's gone. So, say if this was caused by your telepathic
Yeah,
residual whatever,
yeah,
before it drew your attention, it was just existing. But now that your attention is there, you're not the energy that was like giving to your telepathy or whatever
Yeah.
is no longer.
yeah. Like that level of
So,
self-awareness,
yeah,
like
yeah.
self-awareness and capacity to be present at a situation like this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So the group quickly got used to this new phenomena, and it became standard, right, that at the beginning of each meeting, they would sit at the table and say, "Hello, Philip," with their hands on the table, and one by one, they would be greeted by individual knocks emanating from the table below their own hands.
Wow.
And that's how they knew, like, they were being greeted.
they were being addressed
Yeah.
individually.
And this, like, over time, I don't know if I get into this further down, it wasn't exclusive to the group. Like, they had other people come in and be like, "Yeah, come on in, say hello to Philip." And they would experience it the exact same way. You know what I mean? Like, and that was just how he communicated. So using a one knock for yes, two knock for no system, the group would chat with Philip at every meeting going forth. And this is how they would flesh out his story. So they had completely made up the story, but now they were able to, like, ask him his opinions on things.
Yeah,
His response,
Philip.
yeah, his responses were typically strong, but if he was unsure about a question, the answer would be quieter. So he might be like, "Yeah, sure," and it's like a soft knock.
Like,
But if it was something that everybody knew and agreed upon, it would be like, "Yes, absolutely," loud knock. If someone told a joke, Philip,
he'd be like, ha 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 ha.
literally. So that's it. Not quite like that, but what they described was a series of rolling knocks on the table. So I think it would have been like, "I'm sorry if this is annoying for the audio, but like,"
I'm not sorry.
and that's how they would know. Like, oh yeah, he
that's
found
so
that funny.
funny.
If he didn't find it funny, and this is where it gets creepy again,
Oh,
a deep scratching would come
Oh.
from inside the table. Like
crazy.
slow, steady scratching. And they couldn't, like, no damage was being done. It's like it was coming from inside
the table.
the structure, like the molecular structure of the fucking table.
Yeah.
And this would also happen if they asked him, like, questions about, say, his wife, who he didn't like, stuff like that. Anything he wasn't happy talking about, they would get this weird scratching that honestly, like, freaks me out.
And would they let it go?
Sometimes they would press it, sometimes they wouldn't. Because, like, as well, other noises that they would get, and I don't know if this was in times of tension or not, but, like, it would just sound almost like a boat in the night, like, like the noise of the wood itself moving, that would come from the table. As
Okay.
if something inside of, again, the molecular structure. This wasn't like fancy hardwood table. This was
Like
just
a house settling.
Yeah, kind of.
Because I've never been on a boat.
Well, I mean,
You know,
I've
like
never
when you've been
slept
on
on
your
a-
yacht and the water moves your boat.
no, but you've seen
No.
movies, like, you know what I mean? I don't know how else to describe it, but, like, sounds of, like, distress coming from
Yeah,
within
yeah.
the thing, right? As if something was about to, like, burst out of it. I don't have a yacht. I didn't. Yes, I did have sailing lessons at school. I didn't attend
Are you
them.
serious?
Yeah, it was like for 1 year. Like, most schools probably had this.
Okay, Rich.
No, 'cause this is an Andy Bernard
Yeah.
thing. But no, anyway, I didn't go because I don't like the sea that much. There was a lot of seaweed. I was freaked out. Anyway. So they said that the table would feel different when Philip was there, like it was alive. So they knew when he was present by the, like, feel of the table. Occasionally, when they asked Philip to do something, such as knock on the room upstairs, which they did do at least on one occasion, there was a meeting going on upstairs. They were like, "Oh, go upstairs and say hello." I think it was actually Dr. Owen was upstairs at that time. So they were like, "Go on upstairs, make a few knocks and let them know that you're here." And so he did. And they claimed that the table would go dead while he was off doing his business. And then later, others would confirm that they had experienced activity upstairs during that time. And then the table would come back to life whenever he came back, whenever he was done.
Was it like warm or something?
They described it as like a vibration, like a
It
really
would just
low
like
vibration.
constantly vibrating.
Yeah, but I think like, I don't know, like even as they were describing it, in my head it was like, you know, when something's turned on, like say like you've switched something on and you know it's on, even if it's not actually doing anything. It's like, I don't know, like low electrical impulse or something like
Okay.
that. You know, I think this is me guessing, but so the activity didn't seem to ramp up rather than just turn on, right? And the book doesn't do this justice either because, again, they're trying to remain as academic as they can. But it got to the point that if somebody arrived to the meeting late, the table would rush to the door to meet them, right? Like a dog.
What?
Yeah. They reported that occasionally the table acted violently, like a bucking bronco. It would often leave the people behind and seemingly act completely of its own accord, even cornering people, right? There was time, and for some reason, they could not get it to float. But it would have all like 3 or 4 legs almost climbing the wall. The table would be like being bent out of place, like huge amounts of physical strain on this fucking table, but they could not get it to float for more than like a second. Really, really weird. I suppose, like, I don't know, we'll get into this down below. I just had a thought, but it's going to take me away from here. But there's video footage of this. Like, I think there was 2 like local documentaries made about it. It was on the news. It was on like a talk show. They brought the table on the talk show.
It seems like that, like, now that it's essentially like made material, now the laws of physics still apply.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost as if like that was beyond the group's realm of belief.
Yeah, like,
Like, oh no, of course it can't float, but it can run across the fucking room.
oh, okay.
So the whole Philip experiment itself is obviously like kind of weird. And the more I try to actually think about it, the more I struggle to figure out what I even believe, right? In a few different pieces of media, I saw people describe it as a story of a haunted table, which, fair enough, if you want to look at it that way, yeah, sure, it was. And
Oh man, they should have discussed that. Be like, hey, if this table gets possessed, it's not out of the realm of possibility that it can float. Remember, this is a possibility.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
could possibly float. Imagine.
for some reason, that was like, there was a lot of pages on this specifically, like, why won't it float? We're trying to make it float. You know what I mean? Like, it was something that they actually struggled with the entire time. And for some reason, a lot of people were like, well, it's not levitating. I don't believe it or something. You know what I mean?
Oh.
It was like a point of contention. And
Oh, really? Okay,
yeah,
I
yeah.
understand now.
Yeah.
Okay.
but if we were to accept this table, if we were to accept this theory that the table was haunted, it's immediately debunked because they used not just that one table. They used several different tables throughout this experiment. One of them they literally had to retire because it was so badly damaged from Philip. And the knocking was also heard in walls. It was heard in different rooms, right? So it's not just a haunted table. The table was just a part of it, like a
Yeah,
tool.
yeah.
Okay, so let's say that's not the theory. So Philip is a random stray ghost, right?
Okay.
But anytime the group brings up the fact that they created him and they can just as easily send him away, the activity stops. It just dissipates as though because they've said it, now they're focused on the fact. And there was times that they brought it up kind of jokingly, I think. And they were like, now, Philip, like, if you don't perform or whatever, you know, we could just send you away. Or like maybe he was being like aggressive or something like that. And so the next, like, he stopped that night and they couldn't get him back. And then the next meeting, like, was a lot slower to start. You know, so it was like, are they making a new Philip every time?
Oh.
You know, like, so much. Anyway, maybe they just picked a random room in the Tisvapur headquarters that happened to be haunted, right? Like, because this, again, I think it's Dr. Owen's house himself, like, is the headquarters. And, like, so yeah, say they picked this room in the basement and there was already a ghost and that's who they're actually communicating with, right? But the gang carried out sessions in other locations successfully. And even sent Philip to do their bidding on a handful of occasions, like when they sent him upstairs, you know?
Did they ask him? Was there a way to be like to test out that theory if they were making different Philips? Like, was you see what I'm saying? Like asking them like a control set of questions, and did they get different answers?
In their minds, they were contacting the same Philip every time,
Oh, okay.
and it was always him.
It didn't come to them that
Yeah.
maybe it was a different.
Yeah, and like
Okay.
because of that fact, like because I think even if they introduce the idea that hey, this might be somebody else, it throws off the whole experiment now.
Oh, okay. No,
You know
they
what I mean?
have to believe that it's Philip,
yeah.
the same Philip every
Every time,
time.
yeah.
Okay.
So was Philip truly a free-thinking individual, or did he just work from the energy of the group? Right. For example, Sue did not like cigarette smoke. If she was present when Philip was asked whether he liked smoking, even if she was just in the room, not necessarily at the table, the answer was no. Sometimes he would even tip an ashtray off the table into a smoker's lap in response. Like, get the fucking shit off here. You know what I mean? This was the 70s. They all smoked indoors. If Sue was not there, however, and the smokers of the group asked if Philip minded them smoking, he'd say no, not at all. You know? So was this his sentience being like, well, like, Sue doesn't like smoking, so, like, you know, for her sake, let's not. But if Sue's not there, he's like, no, fuck it, like, whatever. I don't have lungs. You know?
Yeah.
The group reported that while they were taking time off from the experiment during the summer months, that some of them experienced poltergeist-like activity in their own homes and wondered, they didn't blame it on Philip, which I would have, like, you know what I mean? Or I would have thought that they would have. They wondered if maybe stopping the experiment was causing a buildup of this newly discovered energy, right? Like a cow needs to be milked. But I'm trying to think of like non-sexual
analogy.
things, yeah.
It shouldn't be that hard.
Like a cow needs to be milked. But this was interesting to me because it seems like none of them blamed Philip on these experiments, on these occurrences. They felt it was I guess I didn't think too hard, but they felt it was the psychic equivalent of a wet dream, from what I can tell. You know what I mean? Might edit that out. It's a family show. It's also said that if the group got distracted during one of the sessions and started chatting amongst themselves, like too much, Philip would start knocking of his own accord, as if to say, like, hey, still here, like, you're wasting my fucking time. But then again, it's like, okay, well, is this just because one person in the group isn't as interested in the conversation? Or is this genuinely Philip going, hey, like, I thought we were talking to me,
Yeah.
you know? So maybe this is a good time to ask for people to let us know what they believe in the comments, because, like I said, the more I think about it, the harder it is for me to pinpoint one specific train of thought that I can get on board with. But it was made clear that the group at no time believed Philip was a disembodied spirit. So they did not believe this. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is how frustrating it is to kind of comprehend.
So they thought
this.
it was coming from them.
Yeah.
Okay.
But, like, they would still... I don't know. It's weird. Like, maybe it's like giving a inanimate object, like a... you know, like you have a microphone.
Oh.
Maybe it's like giving an inanimate object human characteristics or something.
Like slowly being
Yeah, I know. And I'm like just getting more into the desk. But yeah, it's like, I don't know what you would do, like a teddy bear or something, say, and you were like, oh, well, he doesn't like to sit on that chair. Like, we know we're going to
So
put him...
was it only tables that they were...
Well, I mean, that like what else do people sit around?
I don't know, literally anything. A cup.
I see what you're saying, but then what would the cup would be on the table? You know what
I
mean?
don't know, like...
But yeah, like could they have sat around a circle on the floor and got him to manipulate? Well, he was manipulating the ashtray,
Oh,
but he
yeah.
used the table to tip it off, as far as I can
I
remember.
see. Okay.
Anyway,
How interesting.
so another notch in the "What the fuck is Philip" bedpost happened not long after starting the new sessions. I was a little bit confused by the wording in the book, but I think because of summer vacations, they had been doing the sessions in their own homes rather than actually at the TISPR headquarters. Mm-hmm. Or maybe there was something going on there and they couldn't use it. Either way, they were doing it in their own homes and they weren't using like the same home every week. You know, they would go to Sue's place this week and then Al's place the next week, whatever. But the first time since making contact with Philip that they were moving back to the headquarters. They told Philip at the last session, they were like, okay, look, from next week, we're going to be back in your room. It's the official room, and this is where, we're going to continue or whatever. He seemed to grow hesitant, right? For whatever reason, this was one of the times when he kind of like faded. And then again, the next time they started up, his presence was kind of weaker for a while. But then like gradually got stronger and like back to normal. What was more interesting about this, and this is creepy, but the last meeting had been held in Al's apartment. And before heading out to the TIFSPR headquarters that evening, he said, quote, "Come on, Philip, you've got to go to your new home tonight." And I'm just going to quote the next bit from the book. Quote, "Al lives in a bachelor apartment and has a special locking device on his door to discourage burglars. When Al left his home that evening, Philip's table was in its usual place at the far end of his living room, against the window with the chair against it. When Al returned that night, the chair was overturned and the table had travelled across the room and was in the hallway, as if it was following him."
Whoa.
That to me like throws a whole new layer into the Philip story. Like in my opinion, they kind of like brushed it off.
Because it was just him in the apartment.
There was only and he wasn't even in the apartment when this actually happened.
Whoa.
We don't know like at what time this happened though, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, well, so I have it here. I was like, I really don't know what to make of it. Like, was this just Al's psychokinetic subconscious that has now grown so strong from its use that it was able to do this just on his own? Or was this actually Philip, who doesn't exist, saying like, hey, wait, like, don't leave me.
Yeah.
Because if you leave, then I don't exist. But I don't exist because you're not here.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm like, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, what? But wait. Like, no explanation that I can come up with works for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So what happened with when the experiments ended?
Well, we'll get into that. Dr. Witten was the other psychologist, or the other doctor who was a psychologist who observed, I think, every session along with Dr. Owen, who was Iris's husband and also the head of the Toronto Society for Psychical Research, I think. Dr. Witten suggested that because the group essentially regressed through play, like singing songs, jokes, all this stuff, that they had expressed, quote, childlike creativity, essentially. Method acting in a world where they could create Philip, and so it came to be.
Okay.
Now, the book gets much deeper than that. There's an entire chapter just from Dr. Witten. But there was another group within TIFSPR who set out to create their own version of the Philip experiment. They were like, strike while the iron's hot kind of thing. And this time they named it the Lilith experiment, which sounds fucking cool.
Yeah, of course.
This group had success within a matter of just 5 or 6 weeks. They didn't have a year of camaraderie and fucking relationship building, but they used the methods that had been honed by the Philip gang.
Okay.
Another thing, in my opinion, that made them successful was the belief that it could be done because the Philip gang had already done it. So they were like, of course, so we'll just do the same things.
And it'll work.
Yeah. Lilith's story was that she had been a French-Canadian girl who became a member of the French resistance during World War II and was captured and shot by a spy. Completely fabricated, not associated with any real person or anything like that. And Lilith proved, in Dr. Owen's opinion, that any group of people were capable of producing these results. I also read, I think like just on Wikipedia, or it might have actually been like Google AI's answer, something about a Humphrey experiment. I didn't find any like backup for that, but I'm sure that the Toronto Society for Psychical Research did many an experiment, you know what I mean, after a while. But the experiments kind of just petered out from there, as far as I can tell. And like, again, they had local news crews in with the Philip experiment, filming him, or filming the group under like, you know, all the TV lights all crammed in the basement, stuff like that. But yeah, like that, they just kind of petered out. And I think the group kept meeting, you know, but the phenomenon never seemed to evolve from what it was. And unfortunately, nobody ever actually saw Philip, as far as I'm aware, which ultimately was the original goal of the whole experiment. Now, it's my opinion that they didn't see Philip because they didn't have faith in themselves that they could actually manifest him in such a way. They only managed to produce the results that they got after reading that other parapsychologists who they looked up to and respected had managed to do it. So I wonder if, say, Dr. Owen, the observer, had given them false reports that other groups had managed to manifest full body manifestations, would Philip have shown up them? You dig, player? That's what I have in my notes.
Wow, you really have that in your
I really wrote that, yeah.
You weren't just ad-libbing.
Yeah, no, I everything is written down. Now, in other more typical poltergeist cases where actual apparitions have appeared, it's kind of, again, this is me kind of going off the stories that we've read. I'm not saying every one, but the apparitions typically appear towards the end of the activity, and typically only after a quote psychic medium or someone has given a narrative to a previously unknown energy, right? Like at one point, oh, the house is fucking haunted. There's like, stuff flying around. The beds are moving, this and that, but we don't know the reason. And then somebody comes in and he's like, oh, well, the old man who used to live here, he had unfinished business and you're using his favorite spoon or some random shit like that. And then all of a sudden the family might see the old man. But
it's like a building
a
persona
exactly.
And then making him realer.
And then you're applying this to that kind of thing. But the attitude of the Philip gang was that this only happens as a sort of group hallucination brought on by a kind of telepathic implant. So some members of the Tusper gang, and I don't know if they were the same people who were on the Philip experiment, but they had gone to help people were having there was a haunted house in Toronto, and the people living there approached the society and they were like, hey, like, we need your help. We've seen this old lady walking around, we've had this like random ass shit, and there was no old lady living in the house, like it was a ghost that they saw.
She wasn't a squatter.
yeah But the crew that went out to like they made their case. They were like, look, we're not saying that we can fix this. We'll give you like our kind of remedies that we recommend. And it's the same that like we're still using to this day, like, pray or whatever, like, and basically just think it away. But that group saw the old lady. But they still believe that they only saw it because they were expecting to see it. You know what I mean? So they don't necessarily believe that it was a ghost, even though they saw a ghost. Like, it's such a head fuck. And then the Newkirk say that, okay, well, even if this was a telepathic group experience, well, you still experienced it, so you did see a ghost. You know what I mean? Even if it's not a ghost in like the Dickensian definition of what a ghost is. Anyway, I would love to try and contact Philip. I think that could be a really cool, fun little experiment. Like a genuine seance circle with light-hearted, good intentions and people we trust, like, and I don't mean like, oh, well, I don't trust them because, like, I mean people who have the same values and opinion going in. I think we could get similar results, but what I'd love to know is if Philip would get the answers wrong. Like we were saying earlier, would it be the same Philip that the Toronto gang were getting? If we knew the general story, but we had an observer with the full timeline from the book, because they have Philip's full story, which takes place over like 20 pages or something, I can't remember, but like a chunky enough story, and they also have a timeline and dates of what happened and when for this fictitious character. So I'm like, if we had a person that
quite literally like replicate Philip, not just,
but I'm saying, but the observer would know all the actual answers, we would just have a general idea, and then we would compare afterwards.
Oh, I see.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so that's the Philip experiment.
That is such a compelling story.
It's wild. And like, there's so much obviously that I had to cut out because like they've detailed.
It's a whole year of fucking experiment.
No, well, longer. It was a year before they started.
Oh shit.
You know what I mean? Really?
Yeah.
Like, and so I think they started in late 1972. But then the new sessions were the summer of 73, something like that.
So they didn't get results
a
until
year
after a year.
Yeah. Or January of 74 or something like that. So yeah, the timeline is a bit skewed. Again, when you search this, like, I know it's AI, it's the devil, but like a lot of the answers that Google brings up initially are just wrong, because I read the book Conjuring Up Philip, and it's not
Not the
what
same.
Google is saying.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can get the book for free from archives.org, which turns out to be a fantastic source. Conjuring Up Philip, and it's written by, I think, Sue, actually, from the group, whose real name is like Margaret. I think Sue is just a nickname or something. And then there's also a pretty cool article or like case study or whatever you want to call it on like Sci Encyclopedia or something. I'll try and link it in the thing below. But that just kind of gives a briefer version of the story. But yeah, so like there was no real end to it. You know what I mean? Like there's no big like pop. It was just,
They reached a plateau with the experiment.
yeah, basically.
Did they like be like, hey, let's let this much time pass and let's see if
Try
we could
again.
still do it again?
I don't know.
I'd like to see if they'd still be able to do that.
I think maybe the only person who would still be alive from the group would be the youngest member who's in college at the time in the 70s, but he would be 70 now.
Oh shit.
You know what I mean? At least.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know.
Oh yeah, I guess it was 70s, huh?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to go back through, like, because they did publish these in, like, the Society for Psychical Research papers, and stuff. And then there was, like, you know, a kind of documentary made. I've tried to watch it a few times, and honestly, it was just really boring. Even though, like, there's this table, like, dancing around thing. And then the other thing, like, they took the table,
dancing around.
they took the table on, like, to
Tour.
a talk show.
Oh.
And it performed there.
Oh, really?
But I think then this meant that other people were like, these fucking phonies, you know what I mean? Like, you can't
charlatans.
please everybody, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like, yeah, you can't, I mean, it's hard to try to convey a whole, like almost 2 years worth of preparation experiment results,
Yeah.
like genuine experiences
When-
into
when-
like a 30-minute talk show.
Yeah. And when the results are, like, let's face it, kind of goofy, you know what I mean? It's like, because at sometimes it looked like the table was like trying to hump people's legs and shit, you know? So it's like, I don't know. And then at other times it was like genuinely scary.
Wow.
And I still don't know what to believe. But the thing that happened in Al's apartment for me is like an outlier. And I'm like, well, this happened when no one was there.
Yeah. So that's why when I asked you, like, when you were like, did they release something? Did they make something into the world? Or it was just like a mind thing?
Yeah.
Just don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
So there you go. Still no answers.
good story though.
Yeah, great story. And like, I personally referenced it like many a times, but I had never read the whole story. So now you guys know pretty much the whole story, or a lot more than, you know, what I had learned before and stuff like that. So it was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
Right on. Anyway, I don't know. Fuck ice. See you guys next week.
Okay, bye.